You've stuck around. We're into week 3 and the realists. You may remember from the course materials that Mark Twain is also a realist. He doesn't seem like a realist because he exaggerates so much. But in reality, if you look in reality, get that? If you look at those criteria for what realism is that you'll find in this week's materials, you'll see that he pretty well does match up with what realism is all about. Again, it's comical, it's exaggerated, and we sort of accept that, but generally we understand. This week we're looking at 4 writers, 4 very talented writers, and they're not coincidentally all women, because at the same time that realism is coming to the fore, the role of women in society is coming to the fore. And it's not that women hadn't written before. They had written a great deal, and they'd had very great success. I mentioned Jane Austen and Charlotte and Emily Bronte in the course materials. They're English writers, but they were Americans, probably not of the same success just because there weren't that many enormously successful American writers. But we do have Louisa May Alcott, who was staggeringly successful. So it's not true that women didn't have an outlet to write. The problem was women were expected to either pretend to be men, and I don't mean necessarily using men's names, although sometimes they did that, but to write like men would write, or to write like men thought women should write. They're writing from this very domestic, the good little woman voice coming out. And I think these women were all, in their own way, saying, we have our own voice, and it's different from men, and it's equal to men, but it's not exactly what they expect it to be. And so they weren't trying to be men, but they weren't trying to be the women that the men wanted them to be. They were just being themselves. And you're going to find a great amount of diversity. Edith Wharton, kind of focusing on the higher end of society. Kate Chopin, focusing on very much the other end of society. Well, not the other end, but a much lower class, and other varieties along the way. I'm belaboring the point. I want to read just a bit of the very beginning of the Yellow Wallpaper to talk about a woman's voice and realism. It is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion or a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity, but that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I will proudly declare that there is something queer about it. Else, why should it be let so cheaply, and why have stood so long untenanted? Now, why do I read that? Well, first of all, this is realism, and in going toward her realism, Charlotte Perkins Gilman grabs out what could be more real and less artificial than a journal. She is just basically saying, oh look, here's this person's journal, this person that never existed, but we're pretending that this character did exist and that she wrote this journal, and we read it, and she sounds like a very ordinary person. She's apparently fairly well off. Her husband is a doctor. They have enough money to rent a summer house, but she's not a princess. She's not a sorceress. She's just an ordinary person of the upper middle class. And so, and she's coming to this situation with real life problems. I mean, there are no. The house is not haunted, as certain Gothic literature would have it. No problem with that. The haunting comes from herself and the way she's treated and the way her husband tries to overcome her apparent postpartum depression. These are sort of hallmarks to me of what realism is. It's writing about just ordinary people and writing about them in fairly ordinary ways. Now, it does tend to have a little bit of a political or social message along with it, and so you might nod in agreement, or you might kind of bristle at what is said, but generally speaking, you're going to find that it's a lot more realistic than some of the things that the fiction that we would have read for American Literature 1, things like Washington Irving, things like James Fenimore Cooper, Hawthorne, Melville. It's just ordinary people living their lives and the drama and the interest that we find there. So I hope you enjoyed these 4 stories. Maybe you'll even want to dig into these ladies' writing a little bit more deeply. And enjoy the week. I'll talk to you again soon.